Welcome to another edition of Hometown Happenings. I'm Supervisor George Hoehmtown. Thanks for joining us. We've got a great show for you today. We've got three wonderful guests that we'll speak about momentarily, but allow me to give you a little bit of an update on a number of things that are ongoing here in the town of Clarkstown. So we're coming to the end of construction on our turf field over at Zucker Park, and we're preparing for breaking ground for turf fields to be constructed on the middle level at Germans Park. It's an ambitious project which will start shortly and will be going through the fall into the spring. The middle level of Germans Park will be fully turfed, and that will actually enable us to have one multi-purpose field that can be shared from lacrosse, football, and soccer, and two baseball fields, softball and a baseball field. It gives us a lot of flexibility. It's going to extend our playing seasons, and it's going to give residents an opportunity to be able to enjoy our parks for longer, and it's going to enable our sports leagues and some of the travel teams to be able to have access as well. So we're really excited about this. Clarkstown went from not having any turf fields to having 5 in a very short period of time, and we'll be completed with that project by early spring. And that's just about to get underway. Another project that we're about to finish up on is our West Nyack Hamlet Green Park. We're going to have our formal dedication on September 10th. We're going to have the installation of the final statues and plaques, and we're looking forward to having a gala event that'll be taking place at the park on Sunday, September 10th, as we unveil the Tom and Dan Foley statue. Tom and Dan Foley were hero firefighters. Tommy died in 9/11. Danny died as a result of 9/11 illness. And they both were West Nyack volunteer firefighters, members of the FDNY, and we're dedicating the park in memory of our firefighters. It's the West Nyack Hamlet Green and Firefighter Memorial Park, and we'll be unveiling the statues with the Foley family present, along with some assistance from the FDNY ceremonial unit and our local fire departments. So we're really excited about that. It's a beautiful park. We've already seen hosted concerts there, and we've already seen that it's become one of the most popular parks, not just for the town of Clarkstown, but frankly within Rockland County. In addition to some of the other projects that are ongoing, I'm really excited. Clarkstown is going to become the first town with solar on its roof of our town hall, and that's about to get underway. We're going to be installing a 110 kilowatt system on the roof of town hall. It's going to be able to offset our cost of for electricity, and we're going to be receiving several $100,000 back in federal subsidies. We're moving forward with that project as well, and that should be completed by the end of the year. One last project that started as a pilot project, we're working with the Rockland Green, which all 5 towns are a part of, is our food waste reclamation project, and that will be getting underway shortly, as we're looking to move ahead with a dumpster over at the highway department, and people will be able to voluntarily participate the way in which the program will operate. You'll be able to obtain a container that you keep at your house with a disposable type bag that is biodegradable. You put your food waste and food scraps in. We're diverting these from the waste stream, and they're going to be composted and recycled, and it's really a great way to help us reduce the cost of garbage collection. This is kind of the wave of the future. It's also a way in which we can promote better processes for the environment as well. So it's a voluntary program, and people will be able to get more information by contacting my office and through Rockland Green. And as I said, you'll collect food waste and food scraps at your house. You bring it in yourself over to the highway department to a community container, and then it'll be picked up twice a week by a local food company, recycling company, and it'll be processed for basically recycling purposes for composting, which will take it out of the waste stream. Every year our costs go up for garbage collection, and this will be one way that we can actually take things out of the waste stream to ultimately keep costs low, but it's also something that's really great for the environment. So we're excited about that. So as I said, we've got a great show for you today. We've got 3 wonderful guests. We have Billy Keenan, who's a local author with a very inspirational story. and a new book, The Road to Resiliency. He'll be followed by Captain Jim Fay, who's new in the command staff in the Clarkstown Police Department. And in our veteran segment, we have Sergeant George Rath, who's involved with the Marine Corps League and a Vietnam veteran. All that and more on this episode of Hoehmtown Happenings. Stay tuned. So welcome back. My first guest is Captain Jim Fay from the Clarkstown Police Department. Welcome, Captain Fay.
Thank you very much.
So, Captain, delighted to have you on. This is really an opportunity for the residents of the town to learn a little bit more about some folks in the police department. And again, you're one of the senior officers in the Clarkstown Police Department, so an opportunity to introduce you to the people of the town. Mm-hmm. So, congratulations on your recent promotion a couple of months ago.
Thank you.
And maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background, and how you got into law enforcement.
Sure. I actually grew up here in town. My family's historical, been in the town since the 1800s, so I've got deep roots here. But went to Nanuet High School, off to Marist College after that, and really what always intrigued me was investigations and things of that nature. And I applied to multiple agencies, and the first hiring opportunity I got was the town of Clarkstown, and it worked out well in that shortly after becoming a patrol officer, within a few years, a position opened up at the Rockland County Narcotics Task Force, mm-hmm. and I was lucky enough to be assigned up there, where we did extensive investigations back in the 90s and early 2000s. Street drugs were very prevalent, and there was quite a crew of investigators and prosecutors that I worked with, and we did a lot of good work, and it was very gratifying in that regard.
So before we jump into your career, let's just rewind it just a little bit. So you're married, kids as well. Your wife's a teacher, right?
Correct. Teacher in the Nanuet School District for about 20 years now. Mm-hmm. I have two school-age children, a middle school student and a high school student, and they're doing well and they enjoy the town.
Great. And your family, again, I find that intriguing because my family's been here over 100 years now too. But your family's been here since the 1800s. Mm-hmm. Pretty much all in the Nanuet area or around the county?
Nanuet area, yeah. My understanding is moved down from Massachusetts in the 1870s and owned a good chunk of property, I guess, like everybody else did back then. We've got 1 acre left, and right. We're still there, believe it or not. And it's been great, and it's interesting to know a lot of history of the town and whatnot, just by conversations being handed down over the years, so it's enjoyable.
Right. So, and again, so people understand, I mean, you have to take a test for civil service, so you had to be on a list to be hired as a police officer, and then you have to take tests, to be able to be reachable, right? Maybe mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about that, how that's worked for you, because, the process.
Yeah, in New York, it's a 1 in 3 rule. In other words, the top 3 scores, or the top 3 individuals with the top 3 scores are then eligible for promotion. They're all, in theory, on an equal plane. Then 1, 2, and 3 are all equally promotable. And yeah, I think I took my first test back in '97, and it's a challenge in Clarkstown because it's a desirable job. It attracts a lot of good candidates. People study very hard and apply themselves, so sometimes you wind up in the top 3 or somewhere nearby, where if there are promotions, you will then become eligible, and other times you don't. But I've like many others, I put in effort, but I've been fortunate to become eligible on certain lists, and 29 years later, here I am as captain.
Right, and captain, so you're on the second highest rank within the police department, and for folks that don't understand, so the lieutenants, the captains, and the chief are all interviews that take place with the town board and the supervisor, and then there's a collective decision that's made. And so on the most recent vacancy for the captain, you were able to be interviewed and recommended by the chief, and then promoted by the town board after the interview to be captain. So you're second in line in the police department, essentially.
Right. Yes.
As command staff. You've had virtually every job other than chief in the Clarkstown Police Department. I think you've had a really very interesting and very productive career. Just walk us through some of the different positions you've had. I mean, street crimes is big. You were did a lot of work with the district attorney's office, with our intel unit as well. Walk through some of the special details you've been through.
Sure. I guess I can go back chronologically when I obviously graduated police academy in 1994. That was a patrol assignment, which is standard. And as I mentioned just a short time ago, I was lucky enough to get a position at the then it was Rockland County Narcotics Task Force. That went from 97 to 2003, where I returned to the police department and was assigned to a newly created, what was then called an anti-crime unit. And they kind of tasked me with setting it up and acting as a peer or a senior peer towards the officers assigned. And we did a lot of good work. We got that ball rolling, and shortly thereafter I was promoted to detective in 2005, where I worked on Juvenile Aid Bureau. And in early 2006, actually, I became a patrol sergeant and remained in that position for about 8 years. Actually, 8 years exactly. January of 2014, I was assigned as a special operations sergeant, which oversees the traffic unit. At that time, the anti-crime unit was still assigned downstairs, and they have other small units, community policing and whatnot, which is there to oversee. And the chief at the time kind of shuffled the deck towards the fall of that year and decided to move the street crime unit up under the detective bureau. It was the anti-crime unit. We changed to a street crimes unit, and it fell under the command of the detective bureau.
So tell us, so the residents probably don't realize that. So
Right.
street crime. So what would be some of the typical activities? Maybe not now, but some of the things that the street crime unit would do.
Well, we develop informants, sources of information that we then utilize to go out and conduct surveillance operations. And I like to independently create an investigation based on information and make arrests and make good prosecutable cases, which can then be turned into other cases. And I always like to collaborate with other agencies when it seems feasible, and we've made some very good inroads with the US DEA, and now the FBI Safe Streets is a part of our toolbox, if you will. And between the district attorney's office and those two agencies, and other law enforcement agencies within the county who we would meet with on a regular basis, and the intel units, we really put together, I think, a pretty cohesive unit that would address crimes here in Clarkstown, but also elsewhere, because obviously we're a piece of a map, and crime doesn't have borders. So you have to be able to reach out and address issues within the town and outside of the town. And I think you have to have the right people in those positions, and we do here in town. And they made my job easy as sergeant, but it was good.
Right, and so obviously, so you were privy to a lot of sensitive information, and working with not just with the detectives, but also to involve work with the district attorney's office and other law enforcement agencies as well, right?
Absolutely.
So tell us what you did after street crime, after that.
At street crime, I did that. That was a 7-year run. I think we did probably close to 1,000 arrests and more cases than that, and really enjoyed it. And the unit still is successful right now under Sergeant Cortelli. I was promoted to patrol lieutenant in January of 2021, I want to say, where I oversaw the functions and activities of a patrol squad of about 20 officers, 3 sergeants, 3 dispatchers, and also I served as a liaison to the dispatchers and supervised the field training program that we have here within the department for new hires. So a change is good, and I enjoyed that position quite a bit. It was nice to actually get back in with the folks working on the street and reacquaint myself with them, and I think it actually helps in terms of the fact now being captain, I have a familiarity with the individuals on the road, and their personalities and their interactions, and so that's where I'm at now. I missed to say I also served as union president back in the late 90s, early 2000s, in the bargaining committee and as such. And the reason I mention that is because it gives you a really good insight, I think, into the workings of negotiations with labor, which now I'm on the other side of the table, but I understand where they're coming from, and we can have, I think, a intelligent dialogue as opposed to being standoffish and perhaps making mistakes because we want to prove a
Right.
point as opposed to really just following the contract and following the law.
Right. So there's about 235, last I checked, about 235 town police departments across New York State. And out of those 235 town police departments, our police department, the Clarkstown Police Department, is the largest.
Mm-hmm.
I would say it's the best. You know, the resources that we put into it, and we have 161 sworn officers is what our complement's supposed to be within the Clarkstown Police Department. So you're in a senior level position. You know, just assumed that position earlier this year. What's the biggest challenge, you know, for you stepping up into that senior leadership role as a captain?
Right now, it's to ensure communication between all the different units within the department so that we can act efficiently, number one, but also effectively. I meet monthly now, if not more, with the lieutenants collectively, the patrol, and then separate the Detective Bureau and Special Operations to ensure everybody is doing what they're supposed to be doing, but not only that, that they have the tools and resources to ensure that they're doing their job correctly, to make sure policy is clear across the board so that we don't have two different units doing two different things, because that can tend to happen. But now I think with the added level of administrative supervision, the second captain's position, I do think that is very much going to be helpful towards, again, the efficiency of the department, but also communication, which overall affects morale, which affects the work, which affects the output. And I think that's right now where I'm tackling the issue I'm tackling anyway, and I think we're heading in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. You already can see the difference, and just in terms of the leadership within the department. And I can't thank you enough. I mean, you've had a great career so far. It's not over. You're hopefully going to be here for many more years, but 29 years thus far. And as I said, basically every level, you know, negotiating, you know, in a lot of different key units, and moving your way up from sergeant to lieutenant, now to captain. So it's really a remarkable career. It's credit to yourself and credit to your training as well. You know, if there's anything else that I would like you to kind of impart to the residents, it would be really about the commitment to the community. Maybe you could speak to that. I know there's a lot that we're doing with community policing.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about that as well. We've got about a minute left.
Sure. We're always looking to expand what we do and see that we can do it better, like I had mentioned. But we have officers assigned now as peer support officers, just to make sure the mental health of the officers actually is something that we're keeping an eye on, which has always been kind of a hidden thing in police work, but now I think it's becoming more common to speak if something is awry, so to speak. We have officers now being trained and who are quite actually passionate about mental health, and I don't mean of the officers in the department, like I just said. I'm talking about us encountering individuals who may be in crisis, and which seems to, quite frankly, be happening more and more these days. And you know, years ago there was everybody was treated the same, basically. If you were acting out, maybe you were thought of as a jerk. Where now we realize people are in crisis, and there's a completely different modality towards dealing with individuals like that, and we're evolving on that. And I think we're doing a very good job with it, although there's always something to learn. We're involved with community events, it seems almost every weekend. We have officers assigned to protect people, but also to interact with people. It's just as important, because you need communication. You need people used to seeing police officers in good times. Mm-hmm. Years ago, it was whenever someone saw a police officer, it wasn't a good experience. It was never a pleasant experience. And I think that's changing, and we're definitely cognizant of that. And that's a very large part of what we do. We just now we're fortunate to have another SRO being assigned to an Nanuet school district. That'll be the second there. Years ago, schools and police departments operated in a vacuum, and now we're not necessarily mutually exclusive in terms of information sharing and trying to actually prevent young people from heading down the wrong path or becoming involved with the system. Matter of fact, our Juvenile Aid Bureau caseload has dropped significantly since our SRO programs have been implemented. Mm-hmm. And I think that is reflective of the work of the SROs, the school districts, and the police department. And that will continue. And as I mentioned, we just were fortunate to have another officer assigned to Nanuet. So I think that's something we're doing correctly, and it does pay its benefits. So we're trying to pay attention to all the needs of the community, of the trends in society, and also, of course, law enforcement, which I believe our department is good at. And,
Yeah.
that's what we're trying to offer.
Absolutely. And Captain, as I said, you've had a great career thus far, and we expect it to continue for very many years. But thank you for being a great guest, and thank you for your service to the people of Clarkstown.
Well, thank you for having me on. Appreciate it.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Email from school about the incident today.
Scary.
Teachers like me, parents, we don't always know as much as you guys do about what's going on with other kids.
Half the time, it's rumors.
Yeah, but if you're ever concerned about a friend who's having trouble with alcohol, prescription drugs, anything, you need to tell an adult, someone you know and trust. That can be hard, but speaking up about a problem is what helping a friend is all about.
Welcome back. My next guest is Billy Keenan, an inspirational speaker and local author. Welcome, Billy.
Thank you, George. Great to be with you again.
So, Billy, we're going to talk a good bit about your book, The Road to Resilience. I've had an opportunity to read it and to have some great, dialogue about that. But you've got a remarkable life story,
Yeah.
and musician, educator, veteran, father, and a survivor, and somebody that really, and that's really what I think your story will be extraordinarily helpful to folks, they're grappling with a major change in circumstances within their life. So maybe just tell us a little bit about your background, where you were born and raised.
Right. Born in the Bronx in 1967. Dad was on the NYPD. Mom was a stay-at-home mom. 1970, we moved to Stony Point. My brothers and I were all classic Catholic school kids, Immaculate Conception. We were altar boys, played CYO basketball. We all went to Albertus Magnus. And then for my college choice, I had been thinking about it for quite some time. And you see, my grandfather came here from Ireland while he was not yet a citizen. He enlisted in 1917 and went to France and fought in the First World War. And when he came home in 1919, he was honorably discharged and given full citizenship. He had 10 children, 6 boys, 4 girls. 5 of the 6 sons all served in the Army, Navy, or the Marine Corps. Mm-hmm. My dad served 2 years in the Army before going on the NYPD. So when I got to my college choice, I was a varsity soccer player. I was student council president. I had all leadership and service. And I started thinking about service to my country. And it almost seemed like a natural. So I applied for an ROTC scholarship to Fordham. And the Army showed they had a sense of humor. Although I did not get it my first year. I had to reapply in my second year. And that's kind of like a building block to the road to resilience. I faced rejection, but I wanted it so badly that I applied the second year and got the scholarship. And I had to sacrifice dearly for it, but I got it. And then the next big hurdle, senior year, I applied for an active duty commission and got rejected. I slotted in the reserves and I was devastated. Mm-hmm. I went to a 5-month training school in Virginia and competed for the active duty slot, got active duty, another rung on the ladder of resilience. And then after that, I said, all right, what else can I do to challenge myself? So I wanted to become an Army paratrooper. So I went to airborne school at Fort Benning, Georgia. So
yeah, and you talk about that in the book, jump school. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh my God. Well, it's a 3-week course, and the first 2 weeks are the grind. You wake up pre-dawn, and by 5 a.m., you're doing push-ups, sit-ups, crunches, burpees in a sawdust pit. And then you finish with a 3-mile run that has to be done in 7-minute mile pace. And it is grueling. And I faced another setback. I got injured my second week and had to recycle. And I had to ask myself, how badly do you want this? Because I could have gone to my regular unit out in Seattle without my jump wings. But I faced a real crisis, a crucible, at the age of 22. If I reported to my unit and took charge of my platoon, my soldiers are going to look at me and say, why? Why are there no airborne wings on this guy's breast? Either he was too scared to try, or he wasn't tough enough to finish. So I stuck it out, got my airborne wings, qualified as a paratrooper, and then went out to Seattle. And after 2 beautiful, idyllic years in the Pacific Northwest, I was a platoon leader, company executive officer, battalion staff officer. After 2 beautiful years, I woke up one morning, went into my battalion commander, and said, "Sir, I want to go to Honduras." And he said, "All right." So I lived in a hut in Honduras. I was there to be a company executive officer. My company commander got sick, and at the age of 24, I took charge of a 100-man company. And our job, George, we were there as part of what we call low-intensity conflict. We were there to help the poorest of the poor in Honduras, to make sure that they didn't fall prey to a Marxist single-party dictatorship. So it was a real-world mission, and I loved it. I loved every minute of it. But then I got out.
So, but before you
Yeah.
do that, just back to, because it's, being, going through as a paratrooper. So how many times did you jump?
5 jumps.
Right.
5 jumps, and it was a little bit harrowing because the week before my class jumped, an airborne student died.
Wow.
He died on a night jump. His main chute didn't deploy, but you always jump with the reserve chute right in your stomach. But if your main chute doesn't deploy fully, you've got about a 3-second window to pull the ripcord. If you don't, if you hesitate, things are not going to go well. And he burned in, and he passed away. So my class, we began our jump week under this cloud of death and grief. And I wrote a letter the night before I jumped for the first time. I wrote a farewell letter to my parents, George, and I stuck it in the breast pocket of my camouflage. And I did my 5 jumps with that letter. And as soon as I did my 5th jump, I ran off the drop zone. I took that letter and threw it in the trash bin. So yeah, there was a little bit of fear there. But once you jump and the main chute unfurls and you see this big canopy above you and you're floating, it is one of the, I've had some great thrill rides in my life, as is in the book, but that probably ranks as the ultimate thrill ride. And I absolutely loved it, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a blast.
You were also a surfer as well, right?
I was a
Yeah.
surfer, yeah. And I would say jumping out of airplanes and surfing on a beautiful wave are the ultimate thrill rides for me. Absolutely, yeah.
And did you do any parachuting after the military, or that was
No, I was stationed out in Fort Lewis, Washington. So after jump school, I came home to New York, said goodbye to my family, my friends, and actually got the thrill, the pleasure of watching my younger brother John. He was a West Point cadet, and he was boxing in the Brigade Open Championship. So just before I left to go across the country, 3,000 miles, I got to watch my brother John box in the Brigade Open, and he lost, but it was still a great thrill, and also just to bring the beginning to a little bit of a closure of the circle. So my younger brother John and I are 3rd-generation Army veterans. So it just ran through the family,
Right.
and then he ultimately graduated in 1991 and went to Germany, and he did 6 years. I did 3.5, and so yeah, that's how it happened.
Wow. So and Billy, thank you for your service. But you get out from the military. You get your degree, your master's degree, and you become
Yeah.
a teacher, right?
Started teaching at Albertus Magnus, my alma mater, and when they hired me to teach 9th and 10th grade global studies, but also to be the varsity soccer coach. And in addition to that, I ended up as the music minister. So I played liturgical music at every mass and celebration, and I played guitar and piano, and I also ended up directing the school play. So I think the only thing I didn't do was mow lawns, and I was so happy there, George. It's just an incredible gift to be able to teach and to be able to be part of young people's lives and be part of their journey. And like I was this this guy who played guitar and had jumped out of planes. So a lot of the kids really like gravitated towards my message, and a lot of those kids, you become that teacher that they'll never forget. And one of the greatest honors of my life, I had a student, his name was Matt Coyne, and he was always the kid that hung around after class to ask me about airborne school, or what was it like in Honduras. And Matt ended up accepting an ROTC scholarship, and he went on active duty, and right now he just got promoted a couple of months ago to the rank of lieutenant colonel.
Oh, wow.
And and he credits me and my experience and my mentoring of him with choosing that path in his life. And he deployed 3 times, George,
Wow.
between Iraq, Afghanistan, and Iraq. And so I had a role in that hero. So I taught for 3 years at Albertus, and I was married and had a house and a mortgage, and I realized, oh my God,
You need to make more money. Yeah.
I got to make the jump. So I went to North Rockland High School, which is in my hometown, and I loved it. I loved it. I made 2 incredible friends, a guy named Billy and a guy named Brian, and we started triathloning in the first year that I was in North Rockland. And we did that. We trained and competed in triathlons for the next 13 years. And we would get together 3 mornings a week at 6 a.m., swim a mile, and then shower off and go teach 5 classes. So that was my life. And I on the weekend, I played Irish music. I was a band leader of a 6-piece Irish American wedding band. And so it was go, go, go. I was working 6, sometimes 7 days a week.
Right. So Billy, let's jump ahead. So you fascinating career story, but as the old saying goes, into every life a little rain must fall.
Oh my goodness.
So
Yeah.
so I find it remarkable. So and I think you and I had talked about this once before, but and in your book you talk about the dark night of the soul experience. And so September 14th, which ironically, in the Catholic Church, that's the feast of the Triumph of the Cross.
Yes.
When you spoke to the Cardinal, did he bring that up
He
at all?
did not.
Which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But the feast of the Holy Cross on September 14th. So, 2013.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the accident.
Well, here's the crazy part. That day, if you put it on paper, that was the perfect day. And I had marked it in my calendar for months, George. It was the day of the Jersey Shore Irish Festival. And one of my favorite bands, Celtic Cross, they're dear friends of mine. And I just called them and said, hey, would you mind if I sat in, bring my guitar and tin whistle? And they were like, oh, come on. Because very often, if their bass player or guitar player needed a night off, I got the call to substitute.
Right.
So I knew their whole repertoire. So they said, absolutely come along. So the only thing, our performance is going to be 4 o'clock on the main stage in front of about 2,000 people. And the only thing, George, that could have made that day any better was an hour or 2 in the surf. And it was at Seagirt, New Jersey, a beach break that I'd surfed several times before. So I got there, my family took a walk up the boardwalk, and I paddled out at noon. And at 1 o'clock, I wanted one last wave, and that ended up being the last wave. I fell off my board, instantly paralyzed, saved by another surfer, but I was completely unresponsive. They had to defibrillate me twice. 2.5 weeks later, I opened my eyes, and that's when the dark night of the soul happened. And now, this is where the book kind of comes in. So everything that I did in the past is what I call deliberate discomfort. And I didn't get that term from myself. I wish I had. But there was a Green Beret, an actual war hero named Jason Van Camp. He wrote a book called Deliberate Discomfort, Becoming Comfortable, Being Uncomfortable. And when I saw that book, I realized, my God, that's exactly what I've done. I chose the Army, I chose airborne school, I chose Honduras, and I looked at resilience as a bank account. And with each challenge, with each bit of deliberate discomfort, I was making deposits in that account. And when I woke up from that 2.5-week coma, I started making withdrawals on that account of resilience. And I never thought that there could be anything worse than a spinal cord injury. But I was so wrong, because on the road to my recovery, I would ultimately face abuse, neglect, theft, abandonment, and a 3-year divorce. That basically, you want to talk about the dark night of the soul. And, you know, my neighbors in Clarkstown, and I love living here, George. I've lived in Clarkstown since 1985, bought my first house up on Little Brook Lane, and then moved about 7 years later. And, you know, the streets are clean, the services are great. I have wonderful neighbors. You know, I live in a diverse neighborhood. I've got Jewish neighbors and Muslim neighbors, Greek Orthodox and Protestant, and here I am, the Irish Catholic boy who was an altar boy way past the time that it was cool to be an altar boy, you know? And it's just a wonderful place to live and to have raised my kids, wonderful schools. So, I mean, you guys are doing a great job, I have to tell you.
Well, I thank you for that. Now your book it's a quick read. And you go through in depth on a lot of this.
Yeah.
Some of the personal stories. You know, you were telling me off camera that a few months back you actually had the opportunity to go on conversations with Cardinal Dolan.
Yes.
And so what was that like? You know, former altar boy, Catholic school teacher.
Right.
You know, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, our relationship started shortly after my injury. He called my family, reached out several times, and I got to meet him at St. Francis for a ceremony, just a very quick conversation. And then, very interesting, one of the most critical people in my recovery was a man named Stephen McDonald. Stephen was a police officer, shot in Central Park in 1986, paralyzed from the neck down, shot by a 15-year-old. Stephen was 29, his wife Patty Ann was 26, and they were 3 months pregnant with their one and only child. And on the day of Connor's christening, Stephen and Patty called the jail cell. They did not want to go through with the baptism until they gave forgiveness to that 15-year-old. And when I was desperately ill and crying out to God to take me, 6 weeks after my injury, Stephen McDonald called my hospital room, and we had a very quick conversation. And he just said, "Billy, God has a plan for you. It's the only reason you survived. And when you're better, when your rehab is over, you're going to come back to life. You have a significant role to play." And that absolutely changed everything. And when Stephen passed in January of 17, his wife and I became friends in May of 18. And I started my speaking life 6 months after Stephen passed without even knowing it. And that's what put me on Cardinal Dolan's radar, my friendship with Patty Ann. So it's like this incredible circle of life that you start connecting the dots, and it leaves me no other conclusion that these things, they can't be happy accidents. It only confirmed my faith, George. You know, like, and I think that maybe there's a great message here, and this is a way that as a Christian Catholic, my faith works. People commit to our lives to play the role of Savior, and we all have that ability. And I think even if you're a non-believer, the work in that book shows everyone that you have the capacity to not just survive, but to thrive in the face of adversity, and then come through it all and be able to give back. And that's really the thrust of my message. And I went through hell, and I came out of it. And that this may be one of the greatest victories of my life. I suffered the abuse and the theft of hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I came through it all, George. And I'm able to sit here with you, all speaking behind me and ahead of me, and this wonderful book. I'm so happy and proud of it. Just to see it there is almost surreal. But I came through it all, not embittered.
Yeah, you brought up Stephen McDonald. I had the pleasure and the privilege of meeting him several times. When I was in the seminary, he developed a friendship with Cardinal O'Connor.
Yeah.
And it was through that relationship that really continued. They were very, very good friends. In fact, he was a somewhat regular at the cathedral with his wife.
Yeah.
And I remember meeting him when I was in the seminary, and then later on when I was in the priesthood. And very inspirational. And then years later, many years later, I was supervisor here, and he was good friends with one of the local attorneys in Orangetown.
Dennis Lynch.
Dennis Lynch. And Dennis brought him up, and he spoke, I think it was to the Brinks, so for the Brinks Scholarship dinner, or breakfast. And you know, he had a beautiful message. And his wife was there as well. She actually, I think, was the mayor for some time.
She was the mayor of Malvern.
Yeah, mayor of Malvern.
Their hometown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For a good number of years in public service.
Well,
But
you know, Dennis Lynch was the man who brought me the phone with Stephen on it.
right.
And that's just amazing that his name popped up into this little
Yeah.
conversation we're having.
So let me ask you that question. So have you played that role for anybody else that Stephen McDonald played for you?
Really amazing. The very first talk I gave in September of 17 was at North Rockland High School. I had just begun. I had no PowerPoint. I had no great, slick, polished presentation, not nearly the one that I have now. I was in front of a room of 20 students, of one of my former colleagues, and I just told my story. And at the end of it, a young man came up to me and whispered in my ear, "Mr. Keenan, before I heard you, I was thinking of hurting myself. And now I'm not going to." So right there, in that moment, I realized this is what I was, for whatever reason I was saved that day. It wasn't for teaching. My comeback to teaching was wonderful and triumphant, but it was what I wanted. It wasn't what he wanted. And I had to go with this message then. And after that, I was great guns, speaking 2 times a week, going to physical therapy several times a week. And after about a year, word of mouth got around, and instead of 20 kids, it was 700 at Suffern High School. And then West Point, Fordham, St. John's, Dominican, Stack, RCC, and then the pandemic hit. And for the last couple of years, prior to pandemic, everywhere I went, people were like, "Billy, you got to write a book. You got to take this story and write a book." I said, I know, I just don't have time. And then the pandemic hit, and all I had was time. So I went on Amazon, got a USB microphone and a software program called Dragon, and I started speaking. And almost in complete isolation, I told my story. My goal was 1,000 words a day. And in 3 months, I would have a book, 90,000 words. It took me about 6 months, but I just sat in front of my computer screen and began on September 14th, 2013, comma, space bar, I died, period, space bar. Like, I was spelling it. This is how I had to work,
Right.
and I was completely alone. And then to get 90,000 words and then send it to a publisher, it was just this amazing 3-year journey. And to see that book out there, again, it's just, I hope it sells 1 million copies, George. Not for fame or fortune. My life won't change. No amount of money can change this or the way I live my life. It's what it can do for people that are reading it. If you're suffering, if you're having a hard time, I want you to read it and see what a guy could do who couldn't use his hands, couldn't brush his teeth, And I was able through the grace of good people and those around me to get through all of these things and to be sitting here with you. And that's the thrust of the book. And if it gets into 1 million hands, that's 1 million lives that I could impact. And that would be a beautiful legacy to leave.
So it's a book with a really wonderful message. It's Jones Media Publishing. It's The Road to Resilience, the Billy Keenan story.
Yeah.
How can people get it?
Go on Amazon.com. And now once you're on Amazon, there's a menu with all the products that they sell, all the categories. You have to click books.
Mm-hmm.
Click on books, and then in the search bar, put Billy Keenan. And the picture pops right up, and you can order it. It'll be out to you in about 3 days. And the feedback that I'm getting, people are reading it in 2 settings, 2 sittings.
Yep.
Like, I've got a lot of, Billy couldn't put it down. So it's really cool.
Yeah, I got through your book literally in a weekend, over the course of 2 nights and a portion of an afternoon.
Oh, that's great.
But really a wonderful, powerful message. Billy, we're out of time, but I want to thank you for being such a wonderful guest and for taking your gifts and your talents. I mean, you literally, you had everything going for you. Good health, popularity, a musician, a teacher, married, kids, the whole 9 yards. And literally abruptly things change.
Blink of an eye.
Right. And now what you've done is you've taken that and you have a message and you're giving a positive message which is really impacting people for the better. And thank you for that.
George, it is my honor and my purpose, and amazingly, one of the things that drives me is the feeling that I still have so much more to give.
Yeah, you do. You very much
do. So thank you for having me.
Thanks
and
for
thanks to all my friends in Clarkstown. Get on Amazon. God bless you. I love you, and we'll see you soon.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
In every family, small conversations can make a big impact. I grew up on tour with my parents. Kind of different, but we bonded over music, and we talked. Honest conversations, like when my dad shared his experiences as an alcoholic. Your honesty gave me a sense of integrity that I wanted in my own life.
And I wanted you to know, from someone who's been in recovery more than 30 years now, that hard work is what creates success, not alcohol or other drugs, in whatever you do.
Talk, they hear you.
Welcome back. In our veterans segment, we have Sergeant retired from the United States Marines, George Rath. Welcome, Sergeant Rath.
Thank you.
So, as you know, on our Hometown Happenings program, we love to do pieces on our veterans. And I've known you for a number of years through all the different ceremonies that you're a part of through the veterans organizations. So it's great to have you on and have, to honor your service as well. So thank you for your service.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here.
So maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background, where you were born and raised.
I grew up on Long Island.
Mm-hmm.
I was there until, I guess, 1980s. I went to Freeport High School on Long Island. I went directly into the Marine Corps from high school, so that kind of ended my period there. I got out of the Marine Corps in 1973. I lived the bachelor life for about a year, and then I got married, and we eventually came up here in 1985. I came up here.
Right. What'd you do for your career, your work career?
Well, I bounced around a little bit after the Marines. I worked. I don't know who recalls the Earl Scheib auto painter, but I was a regional supervisor for them for a few years. I was traveling from New York to Connecticut, and Stamford, Bridgeport, West Haven, Hartford, then up to Boston and Providence, Rhode Island. And my wife said, "That's enough travel, find something local." So I bought a dog grooming business, and I groomed dogs for 2 years.
Oh, wow.
And then I found my home in the New York State court system.
Mm-hmm.
I took the court officer test in 1982. I started at the end of 82. And for 5 years I was in uniform. Then I passed the court clerk test. And I spent the rest of my 27 years as a court clerk.
Well, thank you for your service there as well. So let's talk a little bit about your career in the military, in the Marines. So what was that like? When did you went right out of high school? Tell us a little bit about your training, and then you were stationed over in the Far East, and you served during the Vietnam War and were in Vietnam, correct?
That's correct. Like I said, directly from high school, I went to Parris Island. I spent 8 weeks at Parris Island. From there, since every Marine is an infantryman, I had 3 more weeks of advanced infantry training. And then I went to Aviation Electronics School in Memphis, Tennessee.
Okay.
I spent 6 months there. As a matter of fact, I got there the day before we landed on the moon in 1969, and I thought it was very appropriate that I would be starting my aviation career the day we landed on the moon. When I left there, I went to New River, North Carolina, which was a major helicopter installation in the Marines, and I spent 2 years maintaining helicopters there, which I fully expected to do for the rest of my career. Didn't work out that way. When I finally got my orders to go to Westpac, the Western Pacific, I got as far as Okinawa, and they said, well, you're also qualified to work on C-130 cargo aircraft, so we're going to put you in a C-130 squadron, which is actually what got me to Vietnam, because by that time, this was 1971, there was more coming out of Vietnam than going into Vietnam.
Right.
And that was part of my job. Now, I was basically an avionics technician, but I was assigned as a crew member, an alternate crew member, on these flights that we would make from Okinawa to the Philippines, then on to Da Nang, up to Japan, come back to Okinawa, basically ferrying supplies in and out of Da Nang. And that constituted my Vietnam service. I spent a year doing that. I came back home and
But before you get to that,
Sure.
the C-130s, so they're enormous planes. Tell us a little bit about that. You know, I mean, you were trained to work on a lot of different planes and equipment, but I mean that's like the workhorse of the military, right?
The C-130 is the largest Marine Corps cargo aircraft. It also does aerial refueling. Part of my job when we were refueling other aircraft, the jets that would come up and they put the baskets out from each wing, and the jets would fly in and hook up to that basket, was I would alert the pilot via intercom that we had a good connection or that everything was safe. I was basically an observer. In addition to that, as I said, they did transport cargo. I can't give you the tonnage that we hauled, but we would haul cargo between stations. You can fly almost across the Pacific without refueling a C-130. It goes the distance, but they're not as fast as the jets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And so you did that for the better part of a year?
Yeah.
Wow. All right, so then leaving from that service, what happened next?
When I got home, I was assigned to a reserve unit as an instructor, basically. The reservists would meet once a month and 2 weeks in the summer. I was in a place called Whidbey Island, Washington. It's a naval air station about 80 or 90 miles north of Seattle. Beautiful country. I stopped there for a refueling mission on my way to a school before I went overseas. And we got out on the tarmac and we're looking at Mount Rainier and at the snow cap and all. I said, boy, what a gorgeous place. And turns out that's where they assigned me when I came back.
Wow. So what was that like? I mean, you were coming home at that point, I guess, what, 1972, roughly?
Right.
So 1972, so, a lot of controversy about should we be in Vietnam, should we be pulling out, the presidential election that year, which also kind of heightened it as well. What was that like? How were you received coming home?
Interesting that you say that. When I got to Travis Air Force Base, they told us don't travel home in uniform, which was really disappointing for me. Mm-hmm. I was proud of my uniform. I was a United States Marine. Of course I want to wear my uniform. They said, don't get on the plane in uniform, you'll only get trouble in the airports. So I changed into civilian clothes and flew home.
Mm. Yeah, that's so unfortunate. But tell us about your, just leaving from the Marines then. So you were stationed for a recruiting officer. How long did you do that for?
Well, not recruiting, but instructing the reservists. Okay. I did that. I had about 8 months left in the service when I came back. Okay. So part of my job was doing color guards and things like that, public ceremonies. We did, before Seattle had a professional football team, the Seattle Huskies, the Washington State Huskies were the big team. And I once had the opportunity to present the colors on the field at the homecoming game for that, which was nice, that kind of stuff. As you see me around town now, you see me involved in that still.
Oh, you have a very commanding voice. I can tell you that. For those that have not been to some of the ceremonies, particularly the ceremonies up at Lozier and some of the for Memorial Day, I go to those. I've been doing that for 15 years or so, and for as long as I can remember, you will lead the detachments when we have the veteran ceremonies over at the county. You name it, you're there at it. So, as part of the Marine Corps League, let's talk a little bit about your involvement with the veterans organizations. What are some of the organizations you're involved with? Marine Corps League is one of them, right?
Yeah, the Marine Corps League. We'll leave that for last because I have a lot to talk about there.
Sure.
But I'm a life member of the Vietnam Veterans of America. I am the adjutant for Post 1600 of the American Legion, which is basically the secretary and the operations guy. Something needs to get done, I get to do it.
Right.
And then there's the Marine Corps League, which I devoted most of my time to. I'm a past commandant, which is the chief executive, and currently I'm serving as chief of staff. I advise the rest of the officers on things that I know from institutional memory. Our biggest project, and one that's dear to my heart with the Marine Corps League, is Toys for Tots. Of all the things that we do during the year, that's the biggest. We've been doing it for well over 25 years in the county. Last year, 36 different organizations came to us for toys, and they asked for a total of 15,000 toys, and we were able to honor every request. We did every request for that. We start collecting toys in the fall, and we're a year behind because we collect toys right up to Christmas. So those toys get stored, and then in the springtime we sort them according to age and sex and so forth, so that we have them to begin distributing again in September. And it's a 1 year behind cycle, but it's a constant job.
Wow. And you guys are great with it. I mean, it's really a labor of love and really helping so many folks that just don't have the means.
That's true. It's like I said, it's very big. Toys for Tots became actually one of the missions of the Marine Corps Reserve in 1948, I believe. Kind of accidentally. There was and I can't remember his name offhand, but there was a Marine officer whose wife wanted to give away a doll that she had made, and they couldn't find any place to do it.
Right.
So they started the Marine Reserves, giving out toys to local organizations, and now it's a nationally recognized charity.
Wow. Yeah, no, it does incredible work across the country. So we're just about out of time, but in the minute or so that we have left, what advice would you have, for some of our younger veterans that are coming out, from the service, and we've had people that have been serving in Afghanistan, Iraq, and what have you, but as things are cycling out, what advice do you have for some of the younger guys that are coming out, going into, civilian life?
Well, the first thing I would tell them is to contact the County Veterans Service Agency. Susan Branham, the director, does a terrific job, and she has the answer to a lot of questions you didn't even know you wanted to ask. So first thing, reach out. Then, again, because I belong to several organizations, connect with military organizations, veterans organizations. You'll meet people that understand what you went through. Not everybody served the same way. I served with guys who were musicians that said, geez, I really didn't do it. I said, you were in. You signed on the bottom line. You said you would go wherever they told you to go. So I don't care where you are or what you did or who you served with, connect with a military organization. We're there to help you, and you'll contribute to us whether you know it or not.
Yeah, that's great. And if somebody wants to get in touch with the Marine Corps League, how would they do that?
Rockland USMC.
Okay, RocklandUSMC?
.com, yeah.
.com. Well, Sergeant Rath, it's great having you on as a guest. Have great deal of admiration and respect for you. As I said, when you're at the ceremonies, you've got a very commanding voice. You're much more.
I'm a little hoarse today, but you'll hear me at the back of the room if I need to.
No, absolutely. I was going to have you give us a dismissed, but you have a very commanding voice. That I remember joking with Jim Monahan, the supervisor of Stony Point, saying, I wouldn't want him to tell us what to have to do, But again, thank you for your service, your long service to our country and your continued service for the veterans organizations.
Thank you very much.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Email from school about the incident today.
Scary.
Teachers like me, parents, we don't always know as much as you guys do about what's going on with other kids.
Half the time, it's rumors.
Yeah, but if you're ever concerned about a friend who's having trouble with alcohol, prescription drugs, anything, you need to tell an adult, someone you know and trust. That can be hard, but speaking up about a problem is what helping a friend is all about.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank my guests, Billy Keenan, Captain Jim Fay, and Sergeant George Rath. Until next time, I'm Supervisor George Hoehmtown. Thanks for joining us.